A very good afternoon to everyone gathered here. Request all of you to kindly settle down so that we may start the event today. I am Dr. Aparna Subramaniam, and I will be your host, taking you through this eventful day to celebrate the Houston launch of Professor Vamsee Juluri's book, Rearming Hinduism, followed by a discussion on bias in the media, higher education, and the future of Hinduism in America by Sri Kalyan Vishwanathan. This event has been put together by the Arsha Vidya Satsanga, an organization working towards creating awareness about Indian dharmic scriptures and traditions, and IHAR, an organization involved with Indian history awareness and research. So we begin with a prayer rendition by Srimati Smita Prahlad, Srimati Hasita Karthik, and Surabhi Karthik.
वक्रतुण्ड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभा निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। शारदे करुणानिधे सकलानवाम्ब सदा जनान् शारदे करुणानिधे सकलानवाम्ब सदा जनान् शारदे करुणानिधे सकलानवाम्ब सदा जनान् चारणादिमगीत वैभव पूरिता किल दीप्तते शारदे करुणानिधे सकलानवाम्ब सदा जनान् भस्मभूषण भूषिते वनरत्नमौलि विराजिते शर्मदायिनि कर्ममोचिनि निर्मलं कुरु मानसं शारदे करुणानिधे सकलानवाम्ब सदा जनान् शर्मदायिनि कर्ममोचिनि निर्मलं कुरु मानसं शारदे करुणानिधे सकलानवाम्ब सदा जनान् हस्तसंधृत पुस्तकाक्षपटि सुधाघटमुद्रिके क्रस्तवास्तिः वर्णने चतुरो नरकचरोत्तवा शारदे करुणानिधे सकलानवाम्ब सदा जनान् क्रस्तवास्तिः वर्णने चतुरो नरकचरोत्तवा शारदे करुणानिधे सकलानवाम्ब सदा जनान् चारणादिमगीत वैभव पूरिता किल दीप्तते शारदे करुणानिधे शारदे करुणानिधे शारदे करुणानिधे शारदे करुणानिधे।
Not wasting much time, we head towards the highlight of this evening, the book launch of Rearming Hinduism, and a question and answer session with Professor Vamsee Juluri that will be led by Dr. Rajkumar Vedam. Before I hand over the proceedings to Dr. Rajkumar Vedam, I would like to make two announcements. One, kindly switch off your cell phones or put them onto silent mode so that you take the best out of this evening. The second is that the audience can write down their questions for Professor Juluri in the query cards that are passed around, and you can hand them over later for the audience question and answer session. There won't be a verbal question and answer for the audience, so please write down your questions that you would like to ask and it will be addressed later. Dr. Rajkumar Vedam, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Aparna. On behalf of the Indian History Awareness and Research Group, and on behalf of the Houston community, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our guest, Professor Vamsee Juluri. So, let me introduce Professor Juluri to you. Our guest, Vamsee Juluri, is a professor at the University of San Francisco and works in Asian studies and specifically in media studies. Professor Juluri received his PhD in communication from the University of Massachusetts in 1999. His research interest is in the globalization of media audiences with an emphasis on Indian television and cinema, mythology, religion, violence, and Gandhian philosophy. He's the author of 4 books. The first, Becoming a Global Audience, Longing and Belonging in Indian Music, Television. The Mythologist, which is a novel. Bollywood Nation, which is India through its cinema. And now the book that we are all interested in, Rearming Hinduism, Nature, Hindophobia, and the Return of Indian Intelligence. His work has been published in journals such as Communication Theory, Television and New Media, European Journal of Cultural Studies and Critical Studies in Mass Communication, and in various scholarly anthologies on globalization, audiences, and Indian cinema. He has also written numerous op-eds and feature articles for the San Francisco Chronicle, Times of India, Open Magazine, India West, and On Faith, among other publications, and is also a frequent contributor to the Huffington Post, as well as the Indian Express. He has been interviewed or quoted about media matters in KQED's Forum, PRI, the Christian Science Monitor, India Abroad, BBC World Service, Al Jazeera Television, and KPIX CBS, and is a recipient of the College of Arts and Sciences in the Media Award. His teaching areas include media, audience and research, international global media, stereotyping and violence, and Gandhi in the media. So we are very fortunate to have such a wonderful person over here, Professor Vamsee Juluri. I'm sure you'll enjoy hearing him speak. I've seen his videos on YouTube and I thoroughly enjoyed every one of them. So please join me in welcoming Professor Vamsee Juluri. I'd like to welcome him and request him to please come and speak.
Hinduism. Rearming Hinduism. Hello. Okay.
Sorry about that.
and we'll quickly speak from there. That
Sure.
microphone is better at this point.
Sure.
We'll get the microphone.
Okay. These microphones are off.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to all the friends who organized the event and for all of you for coming on a wonderfully warm Sunday afternoon. I'm from Berkeley, where we're having a summer fog, so I'm very excited that it's warm here. And I'm also excited about being in Houston for a very random reason, which is I'm from the generation which thought that planet Earth is actually planet Houston. I don't know if any of you remember that reference from the old Superman movies, but I was reminded of it today because I think what we're trying to achieve is nothing less than changing the world. I mean, why should only Hollywood in America have this changing the world fantasy? We were dreaming visions of a better world, a better way to live for thousands of years, even before many other cultures and civilizations had figured out that a way of life based in little violence, as little violence as possible, was possible. So anyway, so we're here on this journey to rediscover planet Earth and planet humanity, hopefully with a conversation about my book. And I just wanted to read from the preface because we're going to be talking a lot about the very terrible and depressing ways that we are being viewed in the media and in academia. Since I happen to work at the intersection of both, it has been terribly depressing for me to keep witnessing this gap between who we are and how we see ourselves, and how Hollywood and Washington and New York and London and New Delhi, let's not forget, seem to view our realities. So before we get into some of the more depressing matters, I thought I'll just read from the preface of the book. The preface is entitled Your Hinduism, and it's just an expression of how I see you, and I think how we see each other, how we see ourselves. You are an achievement. You may not fully know why just yet, but you have probably felt in some quiet way the fact that you belong to something significant that has come before you in history. You might not always know how to express that feeling, but you know that it inspires you and it elevates you. You belong to the one civilization that still stands, much as it once did even after all these thousands of years of human history. Thousands of years of wars, conquest, pillage, subjugation, desecration, and devastation. Thousands of years of supposed progress that have given us a world today that runs on brutal violence against nature, life, and the planet itself. You belong to a civilization that is still standing, but surrounded, as it were, by a mess. In India and across the whole world, of environmental devastation, cultural confusion, ethical indifference, and economic insecurity. But still, it stands. Still, there is hope. For a civilization is not just buildings and machines, but it's people, their thought, and their culture. It is a way of knowing the world, a way of giving meaning and value to the contents of life. It is a resource, most of all, for living intelligently. It is a form of culture, an expression of sensibility, a way of harmonizing science, philosophy, and ethics in a people's every thought, word, and deed. You can call it a religion, a way of life, or a civilization. You can call it what you will, but no word will suffice. 1 billion people on this earth still call God by the same names that people did thousands of years ago. What exists on this earth unchanged for that long? What religion exists on this earth for that long, when so many people have distorted religion, dragged it down from being about love and freedom to being about hatred, coercion, and war? Hinduism could have been wiped out a long time ago. But it wasn't. You are here.
I I apologize that our sound is not completely okay. We have 2 microphones for each of us, but Prasad has gone to get the sound man. So till then, I apologize. We'll be a little ad hoc. We'll come here and we'll talk. I request Professor Juluri also to reply.
Just pull it out. Yeah. The wire is long enough. Yes.
Yeah.
The wire is long.
This might just work. So thank you for that wonderful preface, Professor Juluri. So this is the book, as everybody can see, and we have a very limited number of copies outside. Professor Juluri, let's begin with a question on the title of the book itself. So in these days, you know, the media paints such a dreadful picture of Hinduism with a canard of fundamentalism and violence where perhaps none exists. But nevertheless, a title like Rearming Hinduism can perhaps conjure up images of wild Hindus with trishuls going and attacking people and so on. So what is the correct image of Rearming Hinduism? Why did you name it so?
Thank you. Yes, we'll get to the fears about Hindu fundamentalism shortly, because I'm in the field which invented all this, well, not invented or discovered concerns about fundamentalism, and I'll tell you where my field, academia, has been getting these things wrong about Hinduism. Now, the title of the book, Rearming Hinduism, obviously sounds rather militant and trishul wielding. Now, I was counting on my good heart to tide me over from that title, but anyway, no, really, the title was inspired by this image. The title followed the image rather than the other way around. Yes, and I think we ran short of copies in Dallas, but I think they are available on Amazon, and maybe we can make some arrangements so you get to read it. So, how many of you recognize this image? I'm curious. Do you know where it is?
Hampi.
Hampi, yes. Wonderful. I discovered Hampi, so to speak, very late in my life. Just a few years ago, I took my students there on a study trip, and it's also the town of my mother's birth. I still have family there, and I was, very, very moved by the beauty and grandeur of Hampi, saddened by the devastation that still exists. And years later, when I began to write this book, I wrote this book in about 3 or 4 weeks last April, in a period of quick and very measured fury.
Is it Hampi in Sarna?
No, Hampi is in Karnataka. Yeah, it's in the Karnataka-Andhra border. So, yeah, so it's the capital of the Vijayanagara Empire. And, it's a very, very significant place. It was the last great Hindu kingdom, so to speak, before the British, the Mughals completely took over. So last year when I started writing this book, somewhere along the way I saw this image, and I suddenly realized that it was as if Lord Narasimha had chosen to appear before us in this form. Because if you look at his hand, now if you look at him from a distance, to me it seemed like he was sitting down to write something. And if you look at his right hand, it is missing. And in this age when we've been struggling so much to get the same basic dignity and right every community in America has, which is to just be able to write our own story, speak as ourselves, this picture seemed to convey the predicament we were in. That we don't have the arm, the hand, to write our own story with. So when I saw this picture, I just knew this was going to be on the cover of the book, and I did try to think of polite, choices like restoring Hinduism and things like that. But somehow even my editor, who's a very cautious guy, said no, go with Rearming Hinduism. Let it jolt people out of their complacence. The intellectual crowd I inhabit. Let them realize that we are not rearming for the sake of rearming in some violent way. This is a righteous, intellectual, peaceful rearming again in the face of an injustice, in the face of an amputation. That's where we are.
Thank you, Professor Juluri. So, when I read the book, it mentioned that conditions were more like to give everybody the freedom from hurt and harm, and most of all, conditions that will give them peace, justice, and prosperity. So our desire is not to not teach ourselves first and then teach others too. Our destiny is to let life know itself again. This is from the conclusions of your book. So with regard to that, Professor Juluri, you said two aspects to the purpose of rearming Hinduism. You mentioned that one of the purposes is disarming ignorance and giving Hindus their freedom. If Chandra would put the second question, and giving Hindus their freedom. So if we can tackle the first one, when you say that we want to disarm ignorance, can you expand a little bit? What is the ignorance that you wish to disarm?
Thank you. Okay, you had questions looming over my back. Okay. All right, wonderful. Okay, now that's excellent. Makes it easier. Now, there is a tremendous amount of ignorance, I think, about who we are, how we see the world, and it's as much within our own community as it is within academia and the media. Now, the academia and media examples are very vivid. They're in our face. You know, you see a movie like Slumdog Millionaire, and then suddenly you find, you know, in the original version, in the novel, excuse me, you know, the character is a religious everyman, and, you know, good and bad people exist in all communities. He's harassed by people from different communities. In the movie, how many of you have seen Slumdog Millionaire? Okay. If you were not from India, what would you think of Lord Rama after you see that movie? Or the poet Surdas? That's the only thing that happens. So in Slumdog Millionaire, if you remember, the main character's identity is changed from being an everyman, you know, like Amar Akbar Anthony, the good old Indian formula, to being a Muslim guy who's being frequently and systematically harassed by Hindus. You know, then is it only a movie? Is it not a big deal? Well, I'm from a field which exists to say it's not a big deal. In media studies, all we do is study ignorance and fight it. You know, we have classes on media and gender which look at how the media normalize distorted images of women, for example, or African Americans or other groups, or Muslims for that matter. There's a lot of studies being done, for example, on Islamophobia. Now, when it comes to us, there's virtually no research done on how Hindus and Hinduism are misrepresented in the media or popular culture. And we know it exists, you know, from Indiana Jones, if you go back even from British movie times, all the way to the present, it exists. It has real life consequences. For example, when the Bombay attacks took place, November 2008, just around the same time Slumdog Millionaire came out, I don't know if you remember the op-eds that came out in the New York Times. They were, almost all of them, united in doing one thing: blaming Hindus. I kid you not. I mean, the greatest names in contemporary literature and academia, you had great, you know, very famous writers like Pankaj Mishra and Amitav Ghosh, who were basically, you know, saying that, you know, hey, you know, India is now shouldn't become like America and go to war on Pakistan, and that's all fine, but why blame Hindus? So the reason I'm mentioning that, one, a pop culture example, and one is, you know, a real life example. The two are interconnected. And today, academia is able to call out that kind of ignorance in almost any context. For example, let's say there's a bad movie, a slasher movie that comes out which depicts women being hurt, and a real life incident happens. At least the media comments. Now with Hindus, that is not happening. A poor grandfather was, you know, attacked in Alabama a few months ago, and immediately you had a bunch of South Asian activists attacking the few people who said, look, there are problems with the, you know, that we are facing as a Hindu community. Because remember, the temples being vandalized. So all these real life things are happening, and we see the ignorance in the media and academia. We see the real life consequences. And every time we try to speak, we are shouted down by my own field with all its good intentions. So, so this is not just casual stereotyping. You know, for a media studies researcher, there is no such thing as casual ignorance. Ignorance is something that's manufactured. Ignorance has hundreds of millions of dollars riding on it. whether it's on television or academic grants or universities, and so we're at a very strange time in history where we're beginning to suddenly realize and say, hey, we didn't realize. I mean, we were successful, we are largely happy, our children do well, go to good schools, we have good jobs, we build our temples. So we are largely happy to the point of being, complacent. But then this ignorance that exists in the world is real. And we have to understand it and study it.
Thank you, Professor Juluri. So this leads me to the next important topic that you bring up in your book. You coin a very interesting term which also finds its place to the title. So the questions are on Hindophobia, a very nicely termed phrase over there. It's science versus social science, Edward said, and why Hindophobia still exists. So the questions I have, I think I'll combine 2 or 3 questions here. So in your book, you write about Hindophobia, and one of the questions is, what is this? Is this something real, or is it a conspiracy theory? The next thing is, can you give us an example of an academic who is Hindophobic in your viewpoint, and what facts you have to conclude that the academic is Hindophobic? And also, this unexamined ideology of Hindophobia that you speak of as prevalent in the media academia today, that is not visible to most of us. So perhaps you could explain to us how, whether it is subtle or whether it really impinges on our life, and what Hindophobia is, and can you explain?
Wonderful, thanks. Okay, so I'll go for about 7 or 8 minutes since we've got the questions together. Okay. Let me just read a quick working definition of Hindophobia from my book. This is on page 18. Hindophobia is not a quirk or an individual stereotype that afflicts only some individuals. It is a systematic distortion in human thought that serves to distract the world from the cruelty and the needlessness of suffering. Okay? From the cruelty and needlessness of suffering. Not just Hindu, but all human and non-human suffering too. It exists not so much in the indifferent mind of the average world citizen today, the American or Muslim or Chinese, but in the upper chambers of the institutions that define the world and its people today, the media and the academy. So hopefully that tells you how I see this and how different my view is of Hindophobia than that of a conspiracy theorist. But I'm glad you brought up that phrase, because what has happened is, actually let me just ask, how many of you have heard the word Hindophobia before? Could you raise your hands, please? Okay. What is your general sense? I mean, does it exist, or are we overreacting, or?
It exists.
Okay, okay. I wish you had contradicted me, but no, but it's true, it's true. I mean, we are the successful model minority, etc., but this is an unpleasant reality that we can't deny too much longer. Now, let me tell you how I view Hindophobia as an academic, as I kind of mentioned in the definition. See, that when you use a term like phobia, it tends to imply a psychological bias, that an individual has some kind of an aversion to something. And it's very hard to talk about it in that way. First of all, I'm not a psychologist. I'm a student of culture. I'm basically, what I do in media studies is to look at the stories the media tell us about the world, about who we are. And as I mentioned earlier, media studies is doing a great job of critiquing media narratives about virtually everything in every community, just not us. So, in the absence of, I think, a more sophisticated terminology, I think we do need to coin a word, and the word is, going around. And I think when they can talk about Islamophobia and have conferences, certainly I think, we are not, too bizarre for saying that yes, there seems to be something like Hindophobia going along, over here. Now, what exactly is Hindophobia? I have a couple of views on it. Now, the typical response of the community, and the community has been conscientized. I'm very curious, have any of you heard the word conscientized before? Okay, so that's the kind of stuff we talk about in academics. We need to conscientize people. So everybody's conscientizing, trying to conscientize us about Hindutva and secularism. We need to, conscientize everyone about Hindophobia. In other words, help people understand that what we're facing is not a fantasy, much less a right-wing extremist fantasy. It's a basic human travesty that, we get smeared in this way by the media and academia, and we need to resist it. So the important thing now is that to recognize is this. Much of the general activism that has happened in the community against Hindophobia, by popular writers and bloggers and on the internet, is very important. I think it's lending voice to what we're feeling in the community. But sometimes it gets stuck in the anger, and sometimes it gets stuck in this kind of conspiracy theory tone. And one of the reasons I wrote this book addressed to the community rather than just to fellow academics. I mean, it's academically informed and I can debate it and stand up for it in any academic room. But I wrote it for my friends, my family, people like you and me, because I want us to know exactly how academia thinks, operates, so we can name, confront, and change Hindophobia in the way it needs to be done. There is a risk that the way we are doing it on the social media, at least some of it today, tends to sound very amateurish. It sounds like there's a worldwide ganging up of people against us. Maybe true, may not be true, but it's hard to fight it on that way. The way we have to fight it is to simply say, these are the facts, this is the truth, these are the distortions. And the way I broaden Hindophobia, broadly as I mentioned in this book, I do it in two ways. I mean, the study of critique of Hindophobia. One is by looking at specific Hindu representations or misrepresentations, and I'll talk about the example author in a second. And the other is that, for me, the problem with Hindophobia is not just that you and I are being misrepresented. It is also the fact that many of the values we cherish get smashed out of the way. I'll mention one example. Recently in India, there was a huge debate in the media about a beef ban, right? So, they decided to enforce or reenact some kind of a law which said it's not legal to eat beef in the state. And outpouring of outrage in India and in America and London and all the papers saying this is taking away the freedom of people to eat their natural diet or whatever. And my simple question in all of this was just this. How many of you are looking at it from an animal rights point of view or from an environmental point of view? And that's what I mean by a kind of a secondary example of Hindophobia, where things which are dear to us, like nature, our reverence for nature, we were the original green religion, the original green culture or philosophy. We were the original secular people, we were the original universal people. How the values we stand for are also getting smashed today by Hindophobic activists and writers. So on that note, let me briefly explain what the first half of this book is about. It's a response to a book that you might have heard of called The Hindus and Alternative History. Again, just a show of hands, how many of you heard of this book by Wendy Doniger? Okay. What do you remember about this book? Thank you, sir. That was an accurate response. Yeah, that's about all we need to. Now, here's the irony. Now, I don't know if you've also heard of this, but Wendy Doniger, who wrote this book, which, as you pointed out, bashes Hinduism, is considered to be the greatest expert on Hinduism today. By whom, you ask, or by whom? Oh, my grandma's right.
It sexualizes Hinduism.
Sorry?
It also sexualizes.
Indeed, yes, that is one of the, I think, the debatable points with her work. Now, but the problem is this. You and I know instinctively that there's something wrong with what she's saying. That's not how you or your parents or grandparents viewed Hinduism. Certainly not how your children view Hinduism. Certainly not how Adi Shankara or Madhvacharya or any of the living gurus today tell us about Hinduism. Where does this come from? And it's not inconsequential. See, that is the challenge. If it was just somebody writing in a tabloid or a Ripley's Believe It or Not or a cartoon, you could say, yeah, it's pop culture, maybe it's not that important. But here is an academic with great distinction and honor who is quoted unilaterally as the expert on Hinduism in New York Times and The Guardian and also in the Indian media. And here's the worst part. Sorry?
She got award.
Yeah, she gets awards for standing up to, for freedom of speech. Interesting example on freedom of speech, by the way. So last year, when she was saying that her book was banned and all these things. I mean, all that happened was no buses were burned, no riots. A court case was filed, and she and her publisher decided not to contest it. So they said we'll withdraw the book in India. Of course, the book became an international bestseller after that. Now, there was all this pontificating going on by people like Stephen Prothero, who's a religion writer, and others, saying that, oh, India is oppressing freedom of speech, we must fight for Wendy Doniger's freedom of speech. Now, here's a very interesting thing that happened. There were many of us who, well, not many, a few of us, who had read this book, who were academically trained, and who wanted to respond to that book. Where was our freedom of speech? USA Today published a huge op-ed by Stephen Prothero where he says, Wendy Doniger is like Sojourner Truth. She is the voice of liberal Hindus, and these Hindu fundamentalists are trying to silence her. I wrote an op-ed in response, and the editor says, oh, it's very well written, but we only publish letters, rewrite it as a letter. I rewrote it as a letter, no response. I mean, so that is the nature of indirect censorship. And I think the problem is a lot of American professionals in the media, journalists know things are not right, but then academia is so stacked against us. There's very few people to speak for us. So the problem briefly with Doniger's book, and then I think the next question will talk more about the history and where it comes from, is that she believes, and her supporters believe, that they are narrating this popular, liberal, diverse, pluralistic story of Hinduism, which the Hindutva, right-wing conservative forces, the dead Brahmin male forces, as she might put it, are trying to oppress. Okay? Now, I have read this huge book, and fundamentally there is a problem in the premise, which is that what she believes is the alternative history of Hinduism is actually the dominant history. Okay? Go to a bookshop. Do you still have bookshops or have they all closed? Okay, we still have a few, okay. Now, just as an academic exercise, next time you go to a Barnes and Nobles or something, look at the Hinduism, or they may just call it Eastern religion section. You'll find a lot of Buddhism books, then you might find a few books by Gandhi, maybe one or two, Yogananda. Just very few, Hinduism books you're going to find in even big American bookstores. Who is the only author you find, apart from, say, Gandhi and Yogananda? They're all Americans, and particularly you'll find a lot of books by Wendy Doniger. Okay? You'll find Wendy Doniger's books on Hinduism on the Hinduism shelves in American bookstores, in British bookstores, in Singapore, somebody wrote to me, and of course in India, where she's supposedly banned, and people here are crying and making this big fuss saying we are censoring her. When I was in India on my book tour last month, every airport recommended book of the month, Wendy Doniger on Hinduism, it's right on top. So much for censorship in India, and that is a tragedy, because a lot of people, I think, are not informed by these debates. All we know is, oh, if we oppose this book, maybe we are fundamentalists, let's support it. And it's very hard because we're very good in some fields, but we have not really paid attention to what is going on in the liberal arts, the humanities, the social sciences, and today it's coming home to us that we can't afford to dismiss these fields, because in India maybe we thought these are not very important, but in the US, academia, particularly fields like religious studies and sociology and history and anthropology, have consequences. One example I like to give, in the 1915-20, just after the World War, when the IQ test was invented, the IQ test was actually used to brand immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe as inferior morally and intellectually. Okay. Eminent social scientists signed off on this. Then politicians used that study to ban immigration from these countries. And it was only in 1965, as you know, that again the US opened up immigration to people like us. So there is a precedence of academia being used for terrible policy issues. So that is a real life consequence
Thank you,
of
Professor.
Hindophobia.
Professor Juluri. I like that last thing what you said, because you also wrote that we cannot address Hinduphobic historiography, in other words, unless we also critique species and social Darwinist, what you just said, social Darwinist biases in today's common sense about our past. That's a very interesting set of comments over there. So, talking about academia, I lead to question number 6. Should not the vision in academia to be an objective researcher? Now, many of the Indians in the US have experienced an objective data and fact-based approach to research in sciences and engineering. The question is, we are pretty ignorant of what is happening in the social sciences side. Are social sciences not subject to the same level of rigor that perhaps, maybe it's the wrong word to use, but as in objective as in science and engineering? Perhaps you could give us an insider's look on what you talk about restorative citation of antecedent authority.
All right, you have a PhD in cultural studies, sir.
Thank you.
Just for saying restorative citation of antecedent authorities. Okay, okay, I'll get to that in a minute. This was the work of a very important scholar called Edward Said, whose work has been tremendously influential across the humanities and social sciences, and should rightly be setting the record straight on our problem too today, but it's used against us, and that's bizarre stuff. Okay, so let me answer the first part of the question. So social scientists too like to believe, we like to think that we are objective, we are reasonable, scientific, data-driven, and so on. Now the challenge is this. Now in the world that I know many of you work in and or were trained in the sciences, objectivity is probably much more straightforward to establish. 2 and 2 is 4. Either the command sequence works or it doesn't. Either the rocket launches off from planet Houston or it doesn't. So any natural physical scientific phenomena can be studied fairly objectively. You have the objective criteria for measuring what you want to measure, and whether a scientist does that, makes an observation in America or India or wherever else, the results have to be the same. So that kind of scientific process is fairly well established. Of course, now the more quantum world, it's a different realm, but I'm talking about the basic scientific work. Now, in the social sciences too, the goal is to a large extent, traditionally the goal was the same. Now, the social sciences were established, in the early 20th century, and it was a time when there was a great deal of faith in science in the Western academia. Right, so in just a few decades, scientists had conquered steam, electricity, gravity, that people were flying, atomic energy. So in that period, the early part of the 20th century, there was a lot of belief among social scientists and anthropologists, psychologists, sociologists, that the same scientific methods that had helped scientists conquer nature could also help them conquer the world. I mean, of course, they didn't really say conquer the world. They just said, that we could also understand human beings and societies scientifically. Now, what exactly does being scientific or objective mean? Usually in practice in academia, it just means a process of peer review. Right? You have certain rules and standards which everybody follows. You go into school, then the teachers teach you what those rules are, whether it's something as simple as the proper way to cite a source or the proper way to conduct an experiment and so on and so forth. Now, what happened with the human sciences essentially was that, first of all, objectivity is much more problematic because, it's very hard to object to other human beings' object. And it's not impossible, but it's more challenging. The second problem was, in the early part of the 20th century, what was the global reality? What was India's state, for example, or the state of Hindus in the early 20th century? We were colonized subjects. Okay? And this is a very important notion which I should just mention very briefly. I think the intergenerational play of society is very important to understanding where we are today and also with academia and where we need to go in the future. Very simply today, if you look at all the Hindus, all the people it's just 3 generations. The oldest generation of Hindus are people who grew up when India was a British colony. Okay? Their Hinduism was essentially a survivor Hinduism, where the only religion which survived colonial conquest, was somehow being carried on by them. The next generation, people who were born, say, from the 50s to the 80s in India, people, mostly my peers, who are parents today and who are working today, who are mediating, so to speak, between our parents and our children, we too had certain handicaps intellectually, because in India, post-colonial Nehruvian India, we were never encouraged to respect the philosophy and traditions. Okay, so we just brushed aside religion. We went to temples, no doubt, but we didn't know what it all meant. And our parents also just said, get a job, and they didn't tell us much more. Now the next generation, children born say after the 80s or 90s, whether in India or here in America, there's a lot riding on them when they grow up. Are they going to see the value of this millennia-old civilizational, civilizational accomplishment, or are they only going to see what Slumdog Millionaire and these last few decades of academic and pop culture garbage has given them? And it's a huge challenge, And to connect this back, too quickly to the academic restorative citation, I'll now put it together. So where would all these ideas come from? So today there is this contradiction that we have the three generations, we have the Hinduism as we kind of know it in our heart, but we don't have the resources intellectually to speak about it. And then you have academia, which is saying these totally bizarre things about Hinduism. Where do these all come from? Now, go back to the early 20th century when scientists, for example, were inventing IQ tests to brand whole populations as morally inferior or as cretins or idiots or whatever. This was a time when much of the supposed knowledge of Hinduism in India was also written by a very small group of scholars, mostly from the West. Now the problem is, and so this was a problem that was faced by all communities across the world. So what was peer review in the early 20th century? What was peer review in, I guess, the School of Oriental Studies in London or in any of the universities in America? Who were your peers? They were all probably white males who had probably never been to India or Africa, but they had read some books written by other white males who probably also never went to India or Africa. So they had very distorted views of all these places. But because they were in this position of privilege, they kept echoing these ideas of each other, and then they quoted each other in their works until that became real knowledge. Now this was the dominant paradigm in academia till about the 60s or so. And all communities, Africans, Indians, everybody faced this problem. For example, in my field, in mass communication research, there was a lot of work being done on something called development communication research, which wanted to use TV and radio to develop India, take it out of its poverty and make it more like the West, drinking Coca-Cola or whatever. And many of these studies used to blame what do you think, for India's poverty? Hinduism, right? Not the fact we had been plundered for 400 years by the British. All these studies would just go in and say, oh yeah, this is a culture of poverty, this is the tradition, this is the caste system, this is how Hindus are. And you just get rid of your religion and then you'll have freeways and Coca-Colas, whatever. So, academia was pretty naive and stacked against us. In economics, the Hindu rate of growth, you remember that phrase. How do you call the most prosperous land in the world the Hindu rate of growth? And they're sustainably prosperous, Anyway, so 70s, this is what happened. 60s and 70s, there was all these upheavals in campuses and society, civil rights, women's rights, and so on. And there was a huge backlash against the old dominant Eurocentric paradigm in academia. So scholars, women scholars, scholars from Africa, from India, everyone started saying, hey, you guys are not being objective. You thought you were being objective? No, guess what? You were not really objective. It was just your subjectivity, your ethnocentrism, your Eurocentrism that just gave you the power to say what you wanted. None of this is true. So the old order in academia collapsed. And a new one emerged from the 70s onwards, new fields like women's studies, ethnic studies, post-colonial studies, which gave a voice to all these communities, which said, look, now we'll tell our stories in the social sciences and humanities, and they're doing a great job. But what happened at that time is something totally bizarre. What happened to Hindus? We had been colonized for several hundred years, and rightfully we should have got a voice. Not only did we not get a voice at that time, the total opposite thing happened in academia since the 70s, which is we got reclassified as the people who torture poor Jamal in Slumdog Millionaire. The people who oppressed Kashmir and got what we deserved on 26/11. In other words, Hindus got reclassified in academia as the oppressors. Okay? I mean, they say it in all sorts of sophisticated ways, but I mean, trust me, you know, I'm sophisticated and I want to be. I've read this work, and essentially this is the falsehood of the identity calculus that has emerged. We have suddenly been labeled as the oppressors, you know, as this privileged group, you know, who's oppressing minorities and lower castes and everybody, and that's that. So the challenge now is, you know, that this academic practice has now become a reality. It's really working against us. So one important tool for us, you know, the phrase you quoted is from Edward Said's work, Orientalism. Edward Said wrote this book called Orientalism in the 70s, which actually helped many of these communities name the problem. They named the problem of stereotyping against them. And the phrase you quoted, the restorative citation of antecedent authority, here's another way of putting it. This is a phrase from Stuart Hall, a great scholar in media studies. He once said, you know, the problem with racism in Hollywood is that the same old movies keep getting made. Okay? So, in other words, in academia and Hollywood, there's a kind of formula. There's a formula for success, for survival, for what gets you taken seriously, and what gets you the big prizes and recognition and so on. And unfortunately, in academia, we've ended up on the wrong side of it. We've ended up downwind from it. So the challenge now, I think, for us is, as a community, to start taking this academic narrative about us seriously. And I think the great promise we have is that not only can we fight direct misrepresentation of Hinduism, we can also fight many other biases which few other civilizations or cultures are equipped to fight. For example, like speciesism. You know, you might have heard about the California textbooks where, you know, our children were teased for praying to a monkey god. You know, I think in one of the earlier versions, they said, say Ram Ram and, say Ram Ram and a monkey will appear. You know, things like that. You know what, and I have been, you know, accused by somebody of advocating primitive animal worship. You know, I am proud to be from a civilization which venerates the elephant, the monkey, the chima, as Tyagaraja sang. I mean, this is a great, great tradition of humanity. How we view the world. How we view the world is the most precious resource this planet has got today. And no matter what they say about us, remember that. I mean, I'm a student of culture, and I think that is the promise I'm hoping to capture in my book.
Very good. Thank you, Professor Juluri. That was an excellent response. Reminds me of Ugg in your book, the character Ugg, and the inversion of the value systems. Their value systems being reflected in us. It's like for the life of Pi. The tiger is not really nice to you. You're releasing a reflection of your values in its eye. It's really a wild animal. Kavya has already prompted me that we are running out of time over here. I'd like to remind the audience that we have about 20 minutes of audience question and answers. You should have index cards going around, so I'm sure you have a lot of questions to ask Professor Juluri. Please write down your questions and pass it around to the volunteers who will come and take it, and we'll prioritize it and ask the questions. I think we'll have time for one more question from me. Sure. And I had to prioritize now. Yeah. And from the remaining questions, ask one.
I thought I had 15 minutes for one question, not a whole talk. Sorry.
That is okay. It's wonderful listening to the answer. So I will only talk about question number 10, if you will, Chandra. Yes. You give a lot of importance to the word Tvameva. Yeah. Tvameva meaning you alone. And I think that word encompasses so much of meaning behind it that we could talk for a long time just on that. I'd like you to just talk on that one. You also use it as the title of a chapter. So perhaps you could explain how that word exemplifies the Hindu spiritual worldview, as well as what action you're calling for with that spiritual worldview, and how the Hindu worldview can build a better world. I know it's too much to ask in a short while, but would love to hear your views on that.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, so the second half of the book is called Sanatana. The first half is called Desakala Dosha, the ideologies of Hindophobia. The second half is Sanatana. So the second half is just, an expression of my vision or understanding of the beauty and truth I see in Hindu thought and culture. Yes, and it's also in a way a kind of a solution. I think, let me start with, the concrete part, and then we'll get into the mystical part maybe as the questions keep coming. I think that, there are two kinds of actions we need to take, two kinds of investments we need to make as a community to address this problem. One is, the institutional investment, which is, taking academia seriously, encouraging our children who show promise or interest in writing, in the arts, in sociology, and so on, to pursue these fields. You might have heard this little, parable of mine on YouTube, but I'll say it again, so you remember me saying it to you. You remember how in the old days, if a family had many children, some of the children would stay on the farm or at home and help the parents, and one son or two sons would go and join the army, right, to help the king and defend the country. Now guess what? We're in a situation now where if you have more than one child, let one child become a doctor or engineer, let the other one get into academia. So please remember that. If anybody is interested, please encourage them, because don't be afraid that they'll get corrupted and so on. Once we have more and more people, right-thinking people in academia, once we respect academia, we didn't respect liberal arts and social sciences for almost 2 generations. Once we do it, I think we'll make our mark for this. So that's the institutional side, getting people into these fields, supporting it, ventures of the kind Kalyan will talk about shortly, of making our presence felt as a community in academia. The other kind of investment, and that is going to take me into Tvameva, is a spiritual intellectual investment. That is, we turn our attention to the world we've been steeped in. Try to listen to what our stories, our pictures, our so-called mythology, our stories of the gods, what are they really telling us in a way that makes sense to us today? So history is not, for me, is not just about what happened in the past, whether there was really a Pushpak Viman, or did we really have these flying arrows that N.T. Ramarao and S.V. Rangarao, Telugu movie fans will remember. These dueling old movies about, Arjuna and so on. I don't know whether they were real or not, but what is real to me is the feeling I have for something like a better kind of human conduct to emerge today when I revisit and remember these stories. So what Tvameva means to me, it's very interesting, I'm not a scholarly student of Hinduism. I just got drawn to it in 2 ways. One, just as a human being who was seeing more and more beauty in it and finding some kind of a redemption and hope for me and for all of us in these stories. The second is, of course, as an academician who wants to see a better story emerge about us in the media. So for me, I think Tvameva is a very key idea, you alone. Because I think at its core, the Hindu religious experience or spiritual experience is simply to experience that feeling where we exist not for our own inner dialogue. I'm saying it in a layman's term, so as best as I understand it, where we somehow have to strive to emerge from our own shells of trying to live for our own thoughts and so on, and living for others, living as somebody's brother or son or parent or spouse, living for the other as the country or the nation or the world, the planet. So this ideal of living for the other, I think, is at the heart of who we are as a culture, and it's encompassed in that phrase Tvameva. So what I do is I just talk about what that phrase means to me, and then I take it into stories about Krishna and Rama and how we can use it as a template, both for improving our daily lives within our families, but more broadly, and this is where academia needs to be engaged with, changing the field of academia altogether. So for example, today there is, cultural studies is no longer just cultural studies, Marxist cultural studies, how it started in the 70s. There is feminist cultural studies, which is women basically saying, hey, this is how we critique culture and we want to make a better world. There is black cultural studies, there is Islamic cultural studies. Islamic cultural studies is not just studying Islam from the outside. It is studying the whole world today from Islamic eyes. Same with Buddhist culture studies. We are the only people who get studied as an object in academia. Right? So today I think what we should resolve is, let's learn the practices of academia and let us look at the world through Hindu eyes and Hindu hearts.
Thank you, Professor Juluri. I think at this time we are out of time for our main event, so we will go to the question and answer segment of this show. I have several questions here. I try to sort them, and some of the questions luckily echo the questions that we have missed out.
Okay.
So that is good. So this question says, since Hindu Dharma is a way of life for many Hindus living in USA, what can or should Hindu parents do to arm the next generation, that is our children, to keep this Dharma alive? In other words, what should the NRI do to keep Dharma alive?
Thank you. You know something? If you're an NRI parent and an NRI son or daughter, you are already keeping Dharma alive to a very large extent. Now, what you need to pick up on is the tools to reflect on it and talk about it. And now I'm going to go back to the three-generational template I mentioned earlier, because it always comes in handy in helping us understand a lot of our predicaments and possibilities today. See, the big change that took place from generation AB to generation BC. Okay, AB is the Gandhi generation to Nehru generation, ours. BC is the Nehru, Rajiv Gandhi generation to today's children, okay? Whether in India or more so here. Now, the Hinduism that our parents lived, my parents lived, say, when they were children, and I completely forgot one important thing I should mention because I mention at every talk. This book is dedicated to my father, Dr. J.V. Ramnara, great exemplar of the Gandhian generation. He passed away last November, and but I feel his spirit has blessed this book and gives us hope. He was a professor and a great man, so I just invoke him briefly. Thank you. Now, he's an example to me of, that's why I said that, and I said, you're already embodying Dharma in many ways, because he was not very articulate or expressive about talking about Hinduism. In the beginning, when I started writing about Hinduism, around the time of the California textbooks controversy and all, why are you writing about all this? Write about something else, write about Bollywood, that's your subject, why Hinduism? But, so that is very interesting. That was a mark of that generation. And you know why they were like that? They were like that because that was a colonial survival strategy. And studies have been done on this. During colonial times, the way Hinduism survived the British craziness was by basically going underground. So we'll underground in the sense, we'll have our temples, we'll pray and everything, but we won't argue with them about Hinduism. Whatever you want to say, we'll do. That's why I think about it, the Nehru's time, the men were very, very westernized. They joined the civil service and they waxed their mustaches and maybe wore monocles or whatever. Very westernized. The women kept Hinduism alive at home. So what has happened is, so that survival strategy helped us survive at that time, but it also impaired us in certain ways. The way it impaired us basically was that we didn't know how to talk about it, right? So that is the challenge I think NRI parents have today, is that we're not very good at talking about Dharma to our next generation. I mean, the IHAR does it. I think, all these temples, the kind of community we created for ourselves, movies do it to a certain extent. But the challenge now is to, one, make it more systematic, and for that we do need higher education. And the second challenge I would also say is for us to overcome our fears that children who are interested in Hinduism or Dharma or spirituality are somehow going to neglect their studies because of it. By all means, let's dialogue about it and let's not try to be defensive about it. But just by speaking more, doing the best we can. Yesterday, the Swamiji in Dallas said something beautiful, just say you don't know this. If your children ask you, why do we do this or do that, just, be feel free to say, I don't really know, but you know what, these are the good things I saw, these are the bad things I saw in my parents' generation. I mean, for example, in my grandparents' time, there was a lot more orthodoxy about rituals and temples and caste and things like that. That's a fact. So let's be honest to our children, tell them, yes, there were some things which we don't know why they existed, they were not fair to women or some poorer people. But today that reality is changing. And in the future, what I want us to know is, recognize is that there were many, many, many good things in Hinduism, which the world needs today, which the planet Mother Earth needs today.
Thank you, Professor Juluri. From your book, in response to that, I found a couple of lines I might read it over here. First, we must turn to our gods and goddesses in prayer and in a spirit of devotion and surrender. Second, we must act. We must assume responsibility for the future of our children, the legacy of our ancestors, and most of all, the spirit of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the future of the world, and we must take back this beautiful ideal from its rather superficial use of late. So I found those as a rather nice encapsulation of what you just said. And that leads me to the next question. Temples in tradition have been the keepers of our civilization. Now, Hindu temples in USA do not allow political activism by Hindus. Without that, how will you gain consensus among Hindus?
Oh, wow, great question. See, ours was the temple building generation. And for the next generation, I think temples will have to assume a different dimension. They have to play a much wider role. See, I think what has happened is, to some extent, the word political has lost its significance. Because in academia, political is a good word. They say, yes, women need to be political, minorities need to be political, that's the only way, environmentalists need to be political. But in our community, I think, generally we think political is a bad word. Political means hating people or cheating people. So it's starting to change. We've realized that we do have to be politicized and conscientized as a community. Now the thing about the temples is, I know if some of you are associated with the temple movements here, what you did is fantastic. I saw the new temple that's being built in Dallas, and it is mind-blowing. And I almost presume to wager a little thought, which I only shared with Kalyan and no one else, which is, this temple is so fantastic. For 20 years, let's not build any more temples and focus on academia. But anyway, that's too presumptuous of me to say that, half a joke.
Which temple in Dallas?
The Hanuman temple, yeah. And so anyway, I'm just kidding. No, temples are the backbone of our civilization. Now, the challenge now is this. I think we have to realize that temples alone are not going to give us what is needed. We need to create a perimeter around the temples too, and this is why. Temples give us our culture, but temples really do not have authority today in American society, or even in our own society. So the challenge now is this: what are you going to do if a few years from now somebody decides to create a nuisance, as we say in India, and file a frivolous lawsuit and say these temples are teaching, oppressive rituals to children against their will? Richard Dawkins, who's a great scientist, and many Indians admire him, rightly so, for his scientific work, is a very principled atheist. And many of his criticisms of, his religious experiences and traditions are accurate. But when he dumps on Hinduism, he has no idea what he's talking about. Richard Dawkins, the scientist. And now this is the problem. Richard Dawkins goes around saying that religion is a form of child abuse. Christopher Hitchens has said that. Now start looking, I see the dots. And it's only a matter of time before some crazy person connects them. And the other dot is, okay, religion is a form of child abuse, and somebody else is going to say the Shiva Lingam is a form of a private organ worship. I can't be cruder than that. And what if somebody tomorrow says, that our temples cannot have a Shiva Lingam? And we say, what are you talking about? All 100,000 of us say, no, this is Shiva for us. Our priests come and tell us the same thing. Even our, very, very modern priests, from the modern movement say that. All it takes is one professor. Oh no, we need a professor from, the university, a professor of Hinduism. And maybe some student of Professor Doniger's will come and say, well, Professor Doniger, who's the world's greatest expert on Hinduism, has written extensively and said that, you know, the Shiva Lingam is a phallus. And what implications will that have? Will our children believe us? Will the courts believe us? I mean, if it ever gets that bad. So what I'm saying is, the temples need a perimeter. The temples need an intellectual flank so that what is going on in there can be sustained by a serious intellectual platform. Right now, the only goodwill, I think, is our samosas and, you know, the interest in yoga and maybe Bollywood. And it's okay, for one generation, somehow we pulled it on like that. But for the next generation, because the mainstream of a religion is being defined as fundamentalism, that is the problem today. So the temples have to, I think, recognize that, you know, we need to start thinking about these issues seriously. And in turn, I would also say, again, this goes back to the first question, community activists who want to speak to the community do understand this is an uphill battle. You know, our cause is just, but some of the rhetoric we have used in the past, you know, whether it's, you know, some of our friends in India, in the organizations, or anyway, that rhetoric scares people. And when people don't know better, they think anybody who's a normal mainstream Hindu today is an extremist. So I think we need temples to open up, and we need activists to also widen the way and soften, you know, the way we are doing the critique.
Thank you, Professor Juluri. I think that also leads to the very next question, which is one, I believe, of internalizing Hindophobia, impacts of Hindophobia rather. So that it's a two-part question. It says, why Hindus self-loathe? And why Hindu do not identify as Hindu but as Indian?
Yeah, it's a tough one, you know. It's a tough challenge, you know, because, you know what, we just have not had the cultural mirrors, the cultural resources. I mean, there are so many communities in America which have gone through this, you know, that, you know, but now they're very articulate in claiming their rights and saying, oh, look, the culture never reflected who we are, and now we're going to speak very assertively. So for us, what has happened is, again, you know, generationally, I think it's an aftermath of being colonized, you know, the whole Macaulay education thing, then the Nehruvian idea of intellectualism, where we never really understood the value of Hinduism as a public cultural resource. At best, you know, those of us who believed in God, especially the night before exams or the visa interview, we kept Hinduism alive. But beyond that, you know, we never really said, hey, our religion is telling us to respect Mother Nature. Our religion has more goddesses than other religions. And so it's saying respect women, you know, all these things. So I think, again, the lack of enough reflection and observation on our own culture has to a certain extent denied us the confidence to just be who you are. And it's a tough fight. So one way of doing it is choose your words carefully whenever you can. Say Hindu when it's appropriate, say Indian when it's appropriate. And on the rare occasions where it's appropriate, you can also say South Asian, that's fine. So, yeah, but I think, you know, there's no shame at all in claiming that name.
Thank you, Professor Juluri. I noticed that Kavya has put the 7-minute flag. I think we should be able to get a couple of more questions in. So this is an interesting question. How much do you think imparting Sanskrit education will help in rearming Hinduism?
Well, a wonderful question. I think Sanskrit is really, really important. The challenge, of course, is, you know, who's going to teach it? I know Samskrita Bharati does a wonderful job, or the organizations do a wonderful job. My understanding is, you know, it's being recognized in schools in California, in high schools. The challenge is getting it into the universities. And restoring our understanding of Sanskrit. I mean, I don't know, when I was in 6th grade in India and we had to choose our additional language, the teacher just said, what will you do with Sanskrit? Are you going to become a priest? And you know what? I now, whatever little Sanskrit I read or I listen to, I feel something beautiful in it. So I think Sanskrit is very, very important. It'll get our mind in tune to receive everything else. I think that's how I see it.
Thank you, Professor Juluri. Here is an interesting comment. It's a quotation from your book, where Hinduism is biocentrism, you said in your book. Expand on that, please.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, you got the went to the heart of the book, the live beating heart of the book. I'll credit. I think I mentioned there's a book actually. The book I got that insight from is mentioned in the end notes. It's a book called Hindu Bioethics. One of the few academic books on Hinduism which is actually very sensible. So I've learned a lot from academic writing on Hinduism. Even in fact, many of the Western writers on Hinduism have also been respectful and insightful. So luckily, the Hindophobes are not the only one. Unfortunately, the Hindophobes have just stolen the marketplace today. That's the crisis. Okay, what biocentrism means, I kind of play on that throughout the book in various forms. The way I look at Hindu culture, practices, philosophy, stories, is we are really focused on life, on the nature of life and not on objects. Whether it's the idea of prana, as we were talking about in the car earlier, it's such a rich and important idea in the world today, and I'll tell you why. So in cultural studies, as I mentioned earlier, we're all the time unpacking narratives in our common sense. What are the beliefs we take for granted in the world? So one of the beliefs we take for granted is the popular rendition of violence. I have a chapter called The Myth of Vedic Violence, where I actually talk about Discovery Channel and National Geographic and dinosaur movies and dinosaur books, and how they naturalize a fantasy about violence and survivalism. My Telugu translator is an expert in evolution, and she was saying that yes, Darwin is very widely misinterpreted in Western popular culture. Darwin's view of life is closer to Hinduism. It's not this fantasy of dinosaurs, eating each other up. Like that, there are many, many, I think, assumptions and myths in the popular modern common sense today. And one of them I call necrophilia, and not what it literally means, but other scholars have written about it. And it's a tendency to view living things as objects. And it's a very pervasive part of our culture today. For example, to give you a very obvious example, think of how the media objectifies women and treats them as objects and body parts instead of living human beings. So the antidote to that, I think, is in Hinduism, where our culture makes us recognize the wholeness and interconnectedness of life.
Wonderful. Thank you, Professor Juluri. I request Chandra to go to question number 9. That will be our last question. I think it will lead into the next part of our program by Kalyan. So the question is, how do we take control of our own narratives when we have a dearth of scholars? Our traditional systems are rarely accredited in a Western sense and will almost never offer a license for a job. How can we nurture talent to push the current narratives out and take charge of our own narratives on a sufficiently scholarly platform, knowing that the club is close to us?
Well, knowing the club is closed and not having illusions is the first step. And I think, the community is recognizing that there is a club, and it has, kept us out in all sorts of ways. Why, for example, this Samskrita Bharati, which does such a wonderful job, why don't they teach at the universities? Why is their view of the Sanskrit universe so different from what the academics teach? So so I think the way to do it is really by taking higher education seriously. One thing to recognize, many of us who come here from India have had very limited engagement with the American academia. Right? So we are in grad school for 1 or 2 years, maybe 4 years at most, and then we go and work. We've not seen undergrad education here, we've not seen the culture, what happens. And we've neglected it for too long a time. So now I think what we need to do really is to start engaging with the academy, but engaging in a systematic, organized fashion. Because what has happened in the past is, there were a few well-meaning donors, who wanted to repay their old alma maters or maybe, get some brand recognition. And they gave money thinking that, good scholarship would be funded. And, academic politics, like any politics, is very, very intense and complicated. So it's very difficult to control where you're going. And it's also not right to say, I want to control who gets hired. Because then it becomes an impingement on academic freedom. But by being sufficiently engaged and smart, we can create a situation where we show the right kind of scholars, that we would encourage the right kind of scholarship. Not, just naive, scholarship. We can be critical of ourselves, nothing wrong with that, but to do it from a position of knowledge. So by engaging with higher academia, I think what we can do is equip the next generation of Indian students here, of Hindu students here, as well as the other Americans who are, enjoying yoga and Ayurveda and everything, but then want to say, oh, I like yoga, but yoga is not Hindu, So, we'll be able to tell them, look, you don't have to convert, or you don't have to pay us copyright or whatever. Those are all your ideas, not ours. But our idea is truth. So we would appreciate if you just acknowledge, or at least didn't deny, where some of the best things that are happening to you in your lives today have come from. That much is about all we need from them. So I think the solution, very simply today is, higher education, respect for the liberal arts and humanities, and again, encouraging your children who are artistic or literary and are worrying you to be very, very good at it. They're going to save Dharma.
And with that, I think Kavya shows that time is over for this segment. So I'd like to thank Professor Juluri for patiently answering our questions and answers in such a scholarly manner. So please give Professor Juluri a very big hand. So we have just about 3 copies of the book outside. We'll be ordering more copies. Professor Juluri will help us get more copies, and we'll have it available for the Houston people who would like to see it. So, Aparna?
Thank you, Professor Juluri and Dr. Rajkumar Vedam, for that scintillating question and answer session. We now have inputs from 2 youngsters who would like to share their insights with us. I'd like to call upon Rachna Kataram and followed by Adarsha Prahlad.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to say that my speech is going to turn your viewpoint around on how youngsters view Hinduism and their religion, but that's not why I'm here. I'm simply here to give you my perspective on an issue that's been plaguing a lot of us since we were little, but it's not obvious to you. I take Spanish at school. I've been taking it for 4 years now. I've learned all the grammar and all of the vocabulary I need to know in order to speak to another person comfortably in Spanish. But when the time comes, no words can escape my mouth. Not because I don't know the knowledge, but because I don't have the experience to apply it. Now, as a solution to this, scientists have a term called immersion. Immersion is when you go to a place like South America where you're surrounded by all the people who speak that language, and that helps you speak more comfortably. Now, what happens in schools is something I coined a term for myself, is the classroom effect. It's when people are given the bricks of knowledge, but they don't have the mortar to put it together. Here's how this relates to Hinduism. I think of Hinduism as the language, and my parents are the teachers. Ever since I was little, they've given me tons of stories and information about my religion, and I loved it. My parents are very devout, and I would love to be just like them. But the thing is, my parents were immersed. And when they're immersed, they have more of a connection to Hinduism than I do. I experienced the classroom effect. In India, everywhere you go, you're surrounded by religious influences. There's temples, there's stalls that sell, deities of Ganesha or Lord Vishnu. But here it's not the same. We go to the temple maybe once a week, at most, probably. And many of my other friends have felt the same way, but I'm not making up excuses for this. Here's one of the reasons. I would please like you all to raise your hands if you have a child in middle school, high school, or college, or if they've already left college. A couple of you. And now keep them up if you think that you've seen your child scrambling around trying to fix their GPA or trying to keep up with their extracurricular activities, or if they've just spent a lot of time studying, which they're right to do so. Okay, cool. The thing is, when we're in America, the schooling system is a lot different than when we're in India. And because of that, we don't have much time anymore to think about religion. But I have a solution for this. Some of my fondest memories that have to do with my culture is spending time with my family. And the best way to give your kids a memorable experience is to sit down sometimes, maybe 3 or 4 times a week by a puja room or just in the temple, and talk to them about values that they can learn from the Ramayana or Bhagavad Gita, or tell the little ones a simple Shuklam Bharatharam that they can, practice over and over, which is what I used to do when I was maybe 3 or 4. Even though we're not traditionally showing our devotion by going to temples and performing pujas, we still have little things that can make a big difference for us to be connected to it. Thank you.
Can we have Adarsh Prahlad, please?
Namaste everyone. Today I would like to define cultural self-identity, its importance, and then try to elaborate on what can be done by us, Hindu youth, in this regard to strengthen it. Cultural identity is a feeling of belonging to any kind of social group that has its own distinct culture. Culture in terms of location, race, history, language, religious beliefs, ethnicity, aesthetics, and even food. America is a nation of hyphenated identities. Muslim Americans, Hindu Americans, Japanese Americans, Indian Americans. We hear these words all the time. So the cultural identity that frames us is Hindu or Indian American. And this identity has proudly seeped into a historical reservoir of at least 10,000 years. So what is its importance? Knowing about it makes one more comfortable about why we do what we do, and not being mute when questioned. Ours is the world's oldest continuous civilization that has survived through major periods of historical strife, numerous invasions, colonization, partitions, internal divisions, and even the onslaught of westernization in recent times. We should ensure it not just survives, but also thrives. Hindu culture is a force for good. Its preservation is paramount. Dharmo rakshati rakshitaha. Dharma protects those who protect it. Sanatana Dharma, with its inherently superior value system, inclusiveness, nonviolence, celebration of truth, diversity, pluralism, mutual respect, free thinking, and respect to the nature and environment is the way forward for humanity, for everlasting peace and prosperity. We should ensure that it is protected and nurtured. So what are some things that Hindu youth can do to strengthen it? Projecting Hindu culture and values when there is an opportunity is an excellent way. So here are some things that we did at school. During Biography Day, my brother dressed up as a famous personality, Swami Vivekananda. And during Pi Day, I highlighted some of Ramanujam's famous formulas and his contributions. During Multicultural Day, I sang Santatam Pahimam and explained how Muthuswami Dikshitar's famous song is linked to My Country 'Tis of Thee and the British national anthem God Save the Queen. I also sang the song to indicate how the exact tune had been copied. During Deepavali, I gave my teachers gifts on the occasion of the festival and explained the importance of lighting clay diyas and their significance. For parent storytelling, I told my mom about it. And when I was little, she came and told stories, Indian-based stories, such as Panchatantra and Jataka tales. For Career Day, I told my mom, and she brought her Carnatic music set and explained to the kids how music could be a hobby or a career. In general, attending Sunday schools conducted by dharmic organizations and being part of new initiatives that continuously expand your horizon. Connecting with other Hindus, such as in Hindu camps, further immersing yourself in this identity and thus enriching your experiences. Connecting with non-Hindus, celebrating Dharma and its values. Guru Vandana is an example where we explain the importance of the Guru, Goddess Saraswati, and emphasis on knowledge. As you may already know, the upcoming International Yoga Day on June 21st is an excellent opportunity to ask your friends everywhere to come and join the cause for better health, harmony, and peace. Identifying whitewashed history and rediscovering truths about your culture and thus yourself, thus contributing to textbook correction, as nationwide textbooks misinterpret Hinduism and Indian culture. Developing leadership skills to become articulate and well-versed, to maneuver through American dynamics and counter and campaign against violations against our people, traditions, and culture. All said, but hardly done. Preserving and propagating Hindu cultural self-identity is a responsibility for all of us, young or old. I hope that together we can do more. Thank you and namaste.
I must say, those are some lofty and innovative insights into living as Hindus in America, and we should all live up to that. Now to the second highlight of the evening, the talk on bias in media, higher education, and the future of Hinduism in America by Sri Kalyan Vishwanathan. Before he begins with his talk, I call upon Dr. Subrata Gangapadhyay to introduce Sri Kalyan Vishwanathan to us.
Take this opportunity to heartily welcome Mr. Kalyan Vishwanathan on behalf of IHAR as well as Professor Juluri. As global Indians, we find sense and traces of our erstwhile global civilization in everything from tortillas to consciousness studies with Heisenberg and T.S. Eliot and Carl Jung and Ken Wilber, Herb Benson, all thrown in between. And it's to leaders such as Kalyan Vishwanathan and Professor Juluri we look forward to show us that this is really a tapestry of interconnected knowledge that has existed for eons, and to bring to our vision a clarity in this tapestry. And there is no better example than Mr. Vishwanathan, who is attempting to do just that. And with his education at Ohio State University in computer sciences and information management, he went on to become the global head for information management for Tara Consultancy Services, but he transformed himself from being a global Indian to a global Hindu by completing a scriptural study under Acharya Dayanand Saraswati, and then went on to build two institutions of importance. One is the Sanatana Dharma Foundation and Dharma Civilization Foundation. And I will now welcome him to elaborate on that, on his efforts, on how we transform ourselves from global Indians to global Hindus. Thank you.
Namaste, everybody. So, Dr. Juluri left us at the threshold of this possibility of actually taking action within the academia, action in the academic space. And before I get into my presentation, just a couple of things about myself. I belong to that generation where I grew up in a fairly religious Orthodox South Indian family with a lot of questions about Hinduism that weren't answered in the family environment got very confused as I first came to America about Hinduism. Went through some personal crises, but instead of going to the bar to solve my crises, I went to an ashram in Pennsylvania. I went to Swami Dayananda Saraswati. So your Arsha Vidya Satsanga comes from the same source, right? So mostly what I discovered in the ashram was that there was a tremendously intellectually sophisticated side to Hinduism, worthy of study, which wasn't available in the normal everyday environments of our lives, schools, colleges, our entire education system. And I was left with the question, why? What happened? How did we lose it all so completely, right? And that question arose in my mind in the year 1994 when I was in the ashram for the very first time. So it's been 21 years of dwelling in that question that has brought me to this point. And I want to now share about Dharma Civilization Foundation, which is an organization that is less than 3 years old, started in Los Angeles, California by a group of very eminent people with a singular purpose of engaging the Western academia systematically on behalf of the Hindu people in North America, avoiding the pitfalls that have already happened during prior engagements when the Hindu community invested in various South Asian studies departments, hoping that our investments would be honored and the spirit of the investments would be honored, only to find that the academia simply swallowed up their investment and went on studying and teaching whatever they considered mainstream knowledge about Hinduism. There are many examples of that strewn all around North America. I'm not going to go into all of that, but we'll talk about Dharma Civilization Foundation and what it is doing, and one project in particular that I want to elaborate on today. Okay. So topics of discussion: what is the problem? Why has this happened? How do we address this? What are we doing now? Where should we care? Now, a lot of this has already been addressed, so I am not going to go into a lot of details, please. So just keep clicking, it's a lot of animation. So the study of Hinduism passed from our hands, in which it existed for many thousands of years, to the hands of outsiders, to the tradition. Outsiders meaning those who have no commitment to Hinduism whatsoever, but nevertheless they are experts on Hinduism today, like Vedidanaja and so on. So from the insider's Shraddha, it went to the outsider's suspicion about Hinduism. So people study Hinduism today with suspicion.